I had been waiting for this moment for years, the day I could finally say I had made it. After countless late nights, endless self-doubt, and a journey riddled with obstacles, I had received my first major paycheck. It wasn't just about the money, it was proof that I had turned my life around, that I was no longer the screw-up my family saw me as. To celebrate, I decided to do something special. I invited my parents over for dinner, a nice home-cooked meal at my place, followed by a surprise, a fully paid, 3-day luxury resort getaway. It was my way of showing gratitude, of saying, "Look, I made it. I want to share this success with you." I spent the whole day preparing. I cleaned every inch of my apartment, cooked a meal that I knew they'd love, and set everything up perfectly. By the time they arrived, I was buzzing with excitement. But the moment they stepped inside, my excitement fizzled out like a candle in the wind. Their expressions said it all. My dad glanced around, eyebrows raised in suspicion. My mom pursed her lips like she had just smelled something awful. "You really live here?" my dad asked, his tone sharp, disbelieving. "Yes, Dad," I sighed. "This is my home." He didn't respond. Instead, he started wandering around like a detective inspecting a crime scene, opening doors, peeking inside my cabinets, even looking under my sink. I forced a laugh. "You think I'm hiding something?" He looked me dead in the eye. "Just making sure there aren't any drugs stashed away." My stomach dropped. I shouldn't have been surprised. This was the story of my life. No matter how much time had passed, no matter how much I had changed, my past mistakes were all they could see. For context, I was the so-called black sheep of the family, the troubled kid, the disappointment. Years ago in high school, I made the mistake of falling into the wrong crowd, using drugs to escape my problems. It led to a downward spiral that nearly destroyed me. My parents had to send me to rehab. It was a dark chapter, one I had worked tirelessly to leave behind. But to them, I was still that person. Dinner was no better. As I proudly shared my job and my first paycheck, my mother snorted, "Well, I guess that just means more money for your bad habits." My dad chuckled at her joke. I sat there, gripping my fork so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Mom, Dad, I don't do that anymore. I've been clean for years," I said, my voice controlled but firm. My dad leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "People don't change," he said. "You can put on a suit and a fancy job title, but underneath it all, you're still the same." My heart sank. I had spent years proving myself, working hard to rebuild my life, and yet, none of it mattered to them. Then came the final blow. My mother tilted her head and smirked. Once a black sheep, always a black sheep. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My appetite vanished. The dinner I had painstakingly prepared sat untouched on my plate. I had hoped this night would be a turning point, that they would see me, the real me, and not just the version they had frozen in their minds. But it was clear no matter what I did, they had no interest in seeing me beyond my past. For the rest of the dinner, I barely spoke. They, on the other hand, spent the night gushing about my younger sister Mia, the golden child, the one who had never disappointed them. Every word of praise felt like a blade to my chest, not because I resented Mia, but because it was proof that my parents were capable of pride and love, just not for me. By the time dinner ended, I knew there was no point in telling them about the trip. I had planned to surprise them with it after dessert, but why bother? They didn't deserve it. Instead, I smiled, walked them to the door, and waved goodbye as they left. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there in silence, watching their car disappear down the street. And then, I made a decision. I wasn't going to waste the trip, but I also wasn't going to give it to them. I was taking the vacation for myself, and I was bringing a friend. Because for once, I was going to do something that made me happy. I woke up the next morning feeling different, lighter. It wasn't just about deciding to take the trip for myself. It was something deeper, a shift. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing their approval. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just done. I grabbed my phone and shot a text to my best friend Jay. Me. "Hey, last minute plan. You free this weekend?" Jay. "Depends. Am I finally getting my dream car?" Me. "No, but you're getting a 3-day stay at a luxury resort. Fully paid." Jay. "I'm packing." That was one thing about Jay. No unnecessary questions. No lectures about my family. Just pure, unfiltered loyalty. I needed that. By the time Friday rolled around, I was at the airport waiting for Jay at the gate. I had barely posted anything online, but my sister, Mia, had messaged me the night before. Mia, hey, I saw your post. You okay? Me? Yeah, just taking a break. Needed it. Mia, they know? Me, nope. Mia, good. That's why I never blamed Mia. She had a front row seat to the way they treated me. And even though she had always been their favorite, she never rubbed it in my face. Yo, Jay's voice pulled me back. He was grinning, slinging his bag over his shoulder. Let's get the hell out of here. And just like that, I was on a plane, leaving behind everything that weighed me down. The resort was beyond anything I had imagined. The moment we stepped into the lobby, it smelled like coconut and fresh linen, the kind of place where people spent money just to breathe luxury. Damn, Jay whistled. Are you sure they're letting us stay here? I laughed. As long as my credit card doesn't decline, we're golden. The concierge welcomed us with warm towels and fresh juice, leading us to a suite that could have easily been an apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a balcony with an ocean view, and a king-sized bed that looked softer than any apology my parents had ever given me. Jay flopped onto the couch. All right, tell me the real reason we're here. Because I know this isn't just a treat-yourself moment. I hesitated. Jay knew me too well. I was going to give it to my parents. But after that dinner, I trailed off. Jay sat up, eyes narrowing. Let me guess. They called you a disappointment? I scoffed. More or less. He shook his head, rubbing his jaw. Man, I don't get them. You've done everything to turn your life around. What else do they want? I exhaled slowly. I don't think they want anything. I think they just need me to be the failure. If I'm still the screw-up, then they never have to admit they failed me first. Jay didn't argue. He just nodded. That's the thing about real friends. They don't always have to say much. They just get it. By the second day, I had almost forgotten why I was so angry. Almost. Jay and I spent the morning lounging by the pool, sipping drinks that were definitely overpriced. But I didn't care. For once, I didn't feel like the struggling kid trying to prove something. I felt like someone who deserved good things. And then my phone buzzed. At first, I ignored it. But when it kept vibrating, I finally checked. It was my mother. Jay glanced at me over his sunglasses. You gonna answer that? I didn't know. A part of me wanted to ignore it. The other part of me was curious. Did she finally have something decent to say? I sighed and swiped to accept. Hello? Silence. Then, how dare you? My stomach twisted. Mom, you're off spending our money on a vacation while we're at home working our asses off? Are you serious? I blinked. Our money? She huffed. Yes. After everything we've done for you, you have the nerve to go spend your paycheck on some fancy trip, but you couldn't even think to. I cut her off. Mom, stop. Just stop. The rage bubbling in my chest was hotter than the sun beating down on me. I took a breath, forcing my voice to stay calm. I earned this money. Me. Not you. Not Dad. Not anyone else. Me. And after the way you both treated me at dinner, you really think I'd spend a dime on you? She gasped, like I had just slapped her. You are so ungrateful. I laughed. Actually laughed? Ungrateful? You really want to go there? You wouldn't even have this job if it weren't for us. That did it. You mean the job I got without your help? The job I worked for while you called me a failure? Yeah, real generous of you. Her voice turned cold. If your grandparents were alive, they would be ashamed of you. That was low. Even for her. My jaw tightened. You don't get to use them against me. Not after everything you did to keep me away from them. Silence. She knew I was right. I took a deep breath. Mom, I'm done. I'm done trying. I'm done begging for your approval. I've spent my whole life trying to prove I'm worth something to you. And I finally realized I don't need to. She scoffed. So that's it? You're just going to cut us off? I don't know, I admitted. But I do know that right now, I don't want you in my life. Then, without waiting for her response, I hung up. Jay raised an eyebrow. So, how'd that go? I exhaled, sinking deeper into my chair. About as well as expected. He clinked his glass against mine. Then, here's to finally doing things for you. I smiled. For the first time in forever, I actually felt free. And damn, it felt good. The resort was supposed to be my escape, a place to unwind, clear my head, and finally put some distance between myself and the weight of my past. But after that call with my mother, Something inside me felt unsettled. Jay must have sensed it because later that evening, as we sat on the beach watching the waves roll in, he nudged my arm. "All right, talk to me. What's going on in that overthinking brain of yours?" I sighed, dragging my fingers through the cool sand. "It's stupid," Jay snorted. "So is my ex still texting me, but here we are." I cracked a small smile, but shook my head. "It's just, even after all that, after everything she said, I still feel guilty." Jay turned to fully face me, brows pulling together. "Guilty? For what?" I hesitated, staring at the water. "For cutting them off. For standing up for myself. For choosing me." Jay leaned back on his elbows, letting out a low whistle. "Damn, they really did a number on you, huh?" I exhaled, sharply. "Yeah." We sat there for a while, the sound of the waves filling the silence between us. Then Jay spoke, his voice steady. "You know, growing up, my mom always told me something. She said, if someone keeps making you question whether or not you're good enough, they're the problem, not you." I turned to him, my chest tightening. "That easy, huh?" Jay shrugged. "Nah, it's hard as hell. But the way I see it, you've spent your whole life letting them define you. Maybe it's time you start defining yourself." Something about the way he said it hit me differently. I had spent so long trying to rewrite my past that I never realized. I didn't need their approval to move forward. I just needed to stop waiting for it. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter. It was the first time in a long time that I didn't immediately check my phone, bracing for disappointment. Instead, I got dressed, threw on a pair of sunglasses, and met Jay at the breakfast lounge, determined to enjoy the last day of our trip, or so I thought. Because the second I walked in, my phone buzzed again. And this time, it wasn't just my mother. It was Mia. "Mia, call me, now." I frowned. Mia wasn't the type to send frantic messages unless something was seriously wrong. Jay glanced at me. "Problem?" I sighed. "Not sure. It's my sister." His expression softened. "Better pick up then." I stepped out onto the patio and called her back. She answered immediately. "What the hell is going on?" she blurted. I blinked. Good morning? 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 Do you have any idea what you've started?" I frowned, gripping the railing. "Mia, slow down. What are you talking about?" She exhaled, frustrated. "Mom and Dad have been losing their minds since you hung up on her. They've been calling everyone aunts, uncles, even Grandma, telling them how you've abandoned the family and turned your back on the people who raised you." My jaw clenched. "Of course they did." Mia hesitated. "It gets worse." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "How?" "They told everyone you stole the money for this trip, that you're blowing it all on drugs and partying, just like before." My heart stopped. "You're kidding." "I wish I was." Mia's voice softened. "Look, I know you don't care what they think, but I figured you'd want to know before someone else called you to check in with their fake concern." I gritted my teeth. It wasn't just the lie that pissed me off. It was the fact that they knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't just mad at me. They were trying to ruin me. Again, Mia sighed. "For what it's worth?" I shut it down. "I told everyone you paid for this trip with your own money, and that you've been clean for years. But you know how they are. They'll keep twisting the story until it fits whatever narrative makes them look like the victims." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Thanks, Mia." She hesitated. "What are you gonna do?" I exhaled, staring out at the horizon. Honestly, I don't know. But I did know one thing. I was done letting them control my story. By the time I got back to the table, Jay had already ordered for me. He took one look at my face and sighed. "Worse than we thought." I dropped into my chair, rubbing my temples. "They told the whole family I stole the money for this trip." Jay blinked. Then he laughed. I scowled. "Jay, what the hell?" He grinned, shaking his head. "Man, they really don't quit, do they?" I groaned, stabbing my fork into my food. "It's not funny." "Nah, it's hilarious because it proves just how desperate they are. They know they're losing their grip on you, so now they're scrambling to make you the villain." I paused. He wasn't wrong. Jay leaned forward, smirking. "So, what's the move? You gonna let him win?" I exhaled slowly. "No, I wasn't." I picked up my phone, opened my social media, and started typing. "Since some people are spreading lies about me, let's set the record straight. I paid for this trip with my own hard-earned money. No, I'm not on drugs. No, I didn't steal anything. And no, I'm not going to apologize for taking care of myself for once. If that offends you, feel free to exit my life. I'm good either way. I hit post before I could second guess it. Jay grinned. Damn, that's one way to make a statement. I shrugged. If they want to make me the villain, fine. But I'm not playing by their rules anymore. Jay lifted his glass. To cutting the toxicity out of your life. I clinked mine against his, a small smirk creeping onto my face, to finally choosing myself. And for the first time in my life, I actually meant it. The post took off faster than I expected. Within hours, my notifications were blowing up. Friends, old classmates, even distant relatives started liking and commenting. Some were supportive, telling me they were proud of how far I'd come. Others were nosy, trying to stir the pot. But the best part? My parents saw it. I knew, because Mia texted me that night. Mia, well, that was a nuclear move. Me, they deserved it. Mia, oh, I'm not mad. It was kinda satisfying, not gonna lie. I smirked, but my satisfaction didn't last long. Because an hour later, my phone rang again. Dad. I stared at the screen. For a moment, I actually considered answering. Maybe, just maybe, he was calling to apologize. Maybe he finally realized how badly they had screwed up. But I knew better. I let it ring. Then came the texts. Dad, so this is how you repay us? By embarrassing your family online? Dad, you think a little money makes you better than us? Dad, take that post down now. I exhaled, rubbing my temple. Jay glanced up from his drink. Let me guess. Daddy dearest? I showed him the messages. He let out a low whistle. Damn, they're really spiraling, huh? I shook my head. I don't get it. They hate me. So why do they care so much about what I do? Jay shrugged. Because they don't actually hate you. They hate that you're proving them wrong. That hit harder than I wanted to admit. I typed a single response and hit send. Me, I'm done, Dad. Then I blocked his number. I expected to feel guilty. I expected to second guess myself. I didn't. The flight home felt different. Usually, traveling back meant a pit in my stomach, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. But this time, I felt free. Jay and I landed, grabbed our bags, and went our separate ways. When I got home, I sank onto my couch and just sat there, staring at the ceiling. I had no idea what came next. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running in circles trying to please people who would never be satisfied. But that also meant there was an emptiness, a space where my family used to be, even if it had been toxic. Then, a knock at my door. I frowned. No one ever came by unannounced. When I opened it, Mia stood there, arms crossed. I blinked. What are you doing here? She sighed. Can I come in? I stepped aside, and she walked in, flopping onto my couch like she owned the place. I raised an eyebrow. You want to tell me what's going on? Mia hesitated. Mom and Dad are livid. They're telling everyone you've lost your mind. Mom's crying to the aunts, saying you disrespected the family. Dad's pissed because apparently you owe them respect. She made air quotes, rolling her eyes. I scoffed. Respect is a two-way street. Yeah, well, they don't see it that way. She exhaled. Look, I didn't come here to guilt you. I think this time you actually broke them. I frowned. What do you mean? They don't know how to handle it. You've always been the one begging to fix things. And now that you're not, they're freaking out. I let that sink in. For years, I had been the one chasing them, apologizing, trying to make things right. And the moment I stopped, they were the ones falling apart. Mia studied me. So, what now? I hesitated. I don't know. I think I need time. Maybe a lot of it. She nodded. I get that. Then, softer, I don't want to lose you too, though. I swallowed the lump in my throat. You won't. Mia gave me a small smile. Good. She stood up, grabbing her bag. Just take care of yourself, okay? I nodded. You too. As she left, I realized something. Mia wasn't the problem. She never had been. She was just as much a product of our parents as I was. But the difference was, I was choosing to break the cycle. And that was something worth holding on to. A week passed, then two. And for the first time in my life, I felt at peace. I woke up without anxiety gnawing at my chest. I worked without feeling like I had to prove something. I spent time with people who actually cared about me, instead of wasting my energy on people who never would. Then, one evening, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then answered. Hello? A pause. Then, a voice I hadn't heard in years. Hey kid, I froze. It was my uncle, my dad's brother, the one who had always been the outcast of the family, the one who had also gone no contact years ago. He chuckled. Didn't expect to hear from me, huh? I cleared my throat. Not really. He sighed. Mia told me what happened. Figured it was about time we talked. I hesitated. Why now? Because, he said, his voice warm, I know exactly what you're going through. And I thought maybe you could use someone who's been there. I swallowed hard. You mean, yeah, he said simply. I cut them off years ago. Best decision I ever made. I felt something stir in my chest. Do you regret it? Not once, he said. But I do wish I had someone to talk to when I did it. So if you need that, I'm here. For the first time in weeks, my throat tightened, not with anger, but something else. Something softer. I let out a shaky breath. I think I'd like that. Good, he said. Because you're not alone, kid. You never were. And just like that, a part of me that had been missing for years started to feel whole again. Talking to my uncle felt strange. Not in a bad way, just unfamiliar. For years, I thought I was the only one who had ever been through this. The only one who had broken away from the family. The only one who had dared to say, enough. But here he was living proof that walking away didn't mean losing everything. Over the next few weeks, we talked more. At first, it was just occasional check-ins, casual conversations about work, life, and the weather. But slowly, the conversations got deeper. He told me about his own fallout with my dad, how their parents had raised them the same way my parents raised me, strict, demanding, unforgiving. They always needed someone to blame, he told me one night. When we were kids, it was me. Your dad was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. But the second I stopped trying to win their approval, I became the enemy. I swallowed. That sounds familiar. Of course it does, he said. History repeats itself. They did the same thing to you. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling. So what did you do? How did you stop caring? He was quiet for a moment before answering. I didn't. I still care. I just learned that caring doesn't mean going back. His words stuck with me. Because as much as I wanted to pretend I was free of them, I wasn't. I still thought about them. I still had moments where I wondered if they'd ever change, if they'd ever wake up one day and realize what they'd lost. But deep down, I knew the answer. They wouldn't. A month passed. Then 2. For the first time in my life, I was living without my parents' voices in my head, and it felt good. I started spending more time with Jay, going out without feeling guilty, taking trips just because I could. I reconnected with old friends, people I had pushed away back when I was too consumed with proving myself to my family. Mia still checked in, but she never pressured me to talk to them. If anything, she seemed relieved that I was finally prioritizing myself. They act like you don't exist, she admitted one night over FaceTime. But, they stalk your social media, right? I raised an eyebrow. What? She smirked. Oh yeah, Mom doesn't follow you, but she asks about you. She pretends she doesn't care, but trust me, she does. I sighed, shaking my head. That's pathetic. Mia shrugged. That's them. And just like that, any lingering guilt I had disappeared. Then, one afternoon, I got a message that threw me off completely. A number I didn't recognize. Unknown. Hey, it's Dad. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for a long time. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to type out 100 different responses. Talk? About what? The years of emotional damage? The manipulation? The way you treated me like garbage until you realized I had something you wanted? But instead, I just locked my phone and set it down. Jay noticed immediately. Something wrong? I let out a humorless laugh. My dad just texted me. Jay's eyebrows shot up, and I don't know what to do. He tilted his head. Do you want to talk to him? That was the question, wasn't it? Did I want to? I didn't owe him anything, not after everything he had put me through. But at the same time, I was curious. Was this an apology? A real one? Or just another attempt to manipulate me? Jay must have seen the conflict on my face because he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I will say this. If you do talk to him, don't go in expecting closure. People like him, they don't change overnight. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Yeah, I know. But against my better judgment, I texted back. Me, what do you want? His reply came faster than I expected. Dad, can we meet? In person, I exhaled. There it was, the trap. He wanted to see me. He wanted to get me in a room where he could control the conversation, twist things in his favor. And suddenly, I wasn't conflicted anymore. I typed my response carefully. Me, number, whatever you need to say it here. Minutes passed. Then, Dad, I just want to fix things. I scoffed. Now he wanted to fix things? Where was this energy when I was begging for his approval? Where was this when I needed his support? I thought about calling him out, thought about laying everything on the table, but I didn't. Because the truth was, I didn't need him to understand anymore. So I sent one final message. Me, I don't think things can be fixed, Dad, and that's okay. I've moved on. I hope you do too. Then I blocked his number. For good, this time. Later that night, I sat on my balcony, staring up at the sky. For years, I had been searching for something closure, validation, an apology that would make everything okay. But that text exchange made me realize something. I didn't need closure from them. I had already given it to myself. Jay joined me, handing me a drink. So, how does it feel? I smirked. Like I can finally breathe. He clinked his glass against mine. To breathing, then. I took a sip, letting the moment settle. I wasn't the black sheep anymore. I wasn't the screw-up, the disappointment, the child desperate for approval. I was me. And for the first time ever, that was enough. Weeks passed, then months. At first, I kept waiting for the guilt to creep back in, for that nagging voice in my head to tell me I had made a mistake. But it never came. Instead, there was just peace. A quiet kind of freedom I had never known before. I stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes, waiting for another text from my parents. I stopped bracing myself whenever Mia called, afraid she'd tell me they had come up with some new way to drag me back in. Instead, I lived. I went out more. I picked up new hobbies, started working out again, even signed up for a photography class just because it sounded fun. I spent weekends at the beach, took spontaneous road trips with Jay, and for the first time ever, spent money on things that made me happy without feeling guilty about it. I wasn't running away from my past anymore. I was building something new, something mine. One evening, as I was cleaning up my apartment, my phone buzzed. Mia. I smiled as I answered. "What's up, kid?" She groaned. "You're literally 4 years older than me. Stop acting like a grandpa." I laughed. "Never." There was a pause. Then, her voice softened. "I wanted to check in. You seem different lately." I leaned against the counter, thinking about her words. "Yeah, I guess one am." She hesitated. "Good different?" I exhaled, letting myself feel it. The quiet. The ease in my chest that had replaced years of tension. "Yeah," I said, smiling. "Good different." She sighed in relief. "I'm really proud of you, you know." That caught me off guard. "You are?" "Of course. I mean, I know I got the golden child treatment, but that doesn't mean I didn't see how much crap they put you through. And the fact that you walked away, that you're actually happy now, that takes guts." I swallowed past the lump in my throat. "Thanks, Mia. Just stating facts," she said lightly, but I could hear the emotion behind it. We talked for a while longer, nothing heavy, just life updates, her plans for the weekend, and the fact that she had recently started dating someone new. When we finally hung up, I sat there for a long time, just absorbing it. Mia had been the one piece of my family I never wanted to lose, and even after everything, she was still here. I hadn't lost everything, just the things I never needed in the first place. A few days later, Jay and I were sitting at our favorite coffee shop when he suddenly leaned back in his chair and smirked. "So, what's next for you?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "You've spent the past few months detoxing from all the family drama, but now that you're actually living your life, what do you want?" That was a loaded question. For years, my only goal had been survival, getting through school, getting clean, proving to my parents that I was worth something. But now I had choices. I took a sip of my coffee, staring out the window. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But for the first time, that doesn't scare me." Jay grinned. "Now that's what I like to hear." That weekend, I packed a bag and drove out to the coast by myself. No plans, no schedule, just me, the ocean, and time to think. As I stood on the cliffs, staring out at the endless horizon, I felt something shift inside me. For so long, I had been looking for a finish line, a moment where I could say, "I made it. I'm healed. I'm free." But standing there, listening to the waves crash below, I realized something. There was no finish line. Healing wasn't a destination. It was a choice I would have to make every single day. And for the first time, that didn't feel exhausting. It felt empowering. I didn't know what came next, but for the first time in my life, I was excited to find out. Because this time, whatever happened, whatever I built, it would be mine. Story 2. I left my husband after his ex-wife, who had a terminal condition, requested him to fulfill her final wish, getting her pregnant, and he gave it some thought. 8 years ago, my husband Kevin, 33, and his ex-wife Alice, 32, were married, but they split 4 years later. It was an awful one. Her irrational and insane demands for alimony caused it to stretch on for a very long period, and he was obviously not prepared to meet them. I won't get into the specifics, but Kevin's excessive workaholism was the fundamental reason for the divorce. After only a few years of marriage, he had come to the conclusion that they were not compatible, and Alice was always suspicious of him. She often accused him of infidelity, without any evidence, since she was so insecure. After everything was settled, they never saw each other again, and the divorce was rather acrimonious. Until last week, they had not communicated, and he was unaware of her life's events. She unexpectedly showed up at our house. She informed us that since she had no other means of getting in touch with him, she had persuaded one of their college pals to give her his address, and she needed to speak with him face to face about this. I was a little taken aback because I had opened the door for her and I knew who she was, but she didn't appear startled to see me. She merely apologized for showing up like this, but she wanted to speak with my husband and me about something incredibly important and urgent. I summoned Kevin to the room after letting her in. He first gave the impression that he was rather upset to see Alice, but as soon as he was seated, she spent no time in telling us that she had just received a motor neuron disease diagnosis, and that her prognosis was likely not good. We were all taken aback since it was not what we had anticipated. It was also a little off-putting the way she got right to the point. However, Kevin and I both felt a great deal of pity for her, and we started attempting to console her right once. He was clearly upset over the whole situation and was probably going to cry, but Alice wasn't finished speaking. She informed us that because we had come here to fulfill her final request, she didn't need our consolation. Even I felt sympathetic to her because she was young and knew she wouldn't be around for long. Kevin informed her that he was willing to do everything she asked of him. It was not going to be simple. I thus reasoned that she most likely had a final request that we might achieve, but regrettably, that was not the case. She continued by telling us that she had come to us more especially, to Kevin, because she was determined to become a mother. For the last few months, she had been researching anonymous honors and IVF, but she had changed her mind after receiving her diagnosis. In order for her to take the pregnancy to term, she now wants Kevin to contribute. Additionally, they may have shared custody of the child until her death. As soon as she mentioned it, Kevin and I would take over the mother's role and raise the child. I genuinely believed it had to be a prank, so I was dumbfounded. Was this a ridiculous demand to make of your ex-husband and his wife, with whom you haven't talked in years? To my dismay, Kevin didn't respond the same way as I had anticipated. He remained silent for a few minutes before telling Allie that he would consider it and get back to her since this is a big choice, and he has to discuss it with me as well. Therefore, he is unable to make that decision alone. Alice stood up after nodding. After exchanging hugs, she departed. I assumed that when she left, Kevin would finally come around and tell me that this was crazy and that we couldn't possibly agree to it. In order to avoid disappointing Alice and shattering her heart, I assumed he would tell me that he had only promised to give it some thought. However, he didn't do that. He returned to his room, and because he was silent, I had to inquire as to if he was genuinely thinking of consenting to this kind of thing. In fact, he did say yes. It didn't seem that unreasonable, he informed me. Besides, that was her final desire. Therefore, we at least made an effort to fulfill it out of courtesy. I instantly began to panic because, considering the severity of the illness, I could not allow this to occur. I didn't want it for a child that I could eventually have to raise, since I understood that this was something that could be genetically passed on. And really, that was the least of my worries. Prior to it, there were other, more pragmatic issues that also caused me concern. Kevin informed me that he needed some time to consider it since he and Alice had a long history together, and he couldn't just throw it all away, especially now that she was in this state. I attempted to explain to him that accepting this arrangement would be a tremendous mistake, He made an effort to convince me that there was undoubtedly something wrong with the scenario and that we should view it favorably because she had come to him and no one else. For background, I am currently 33 years old and have endometriosis, which makes it somewhat difficult for me to conceive. I would have a harder time becoming pregnant and carrying that pregnancy as I grew older. After 3 years of dating and 1 year of marriage, Kevin and I have spent the last several months attempting to conceive. However, because it wasn't functioning, we figured we might try again later, so we decided to give it a break. Only a month has passed since then, and Alice has finally presented her proposal. Because it could become too challenging for me, Kevin thinks this is a message from the universe that we should give up on our pregnancy adventure and instead grant her final desire. He believes that we should at least take this into consideration because it was his way of explaining how to make the situation seem better. Ignore the reality that she herself is coping with a fatal disease. In addition, there were several more factors to take into account. Additionally, I thought Kevin was thinking a bit too idealistically just because he was outraged about the entire issue. I informed him that I was refusing to back down. I was not going to follow through on this in any manner, and that day we got into a horrible argument. It was, in my opinion, one of, if not the largest, battles we have ever had. After the fight, I just started packing my things and went in the evening. I was infuriated beyond description. This was so bizarre that I wasn't even sure what to respond to him. In order to cope with this emotionally around the time of my departure, I temporarily moved in with my parents. When he returned home and saw me gone, he began phoning me because he had gone for a stroll to get his mind straight. And I picked up because I assumed he would say, "Sorry for treating me so rudely." He then accused me of being insensitive to him and Alice, who was battling for her life, and said that I was being unfair. The last thing she wanted from him was this: we could at least think about it, as it would allow us to have a child without ever putting my body through the stress of a full-term pregnancy. And once more, he expressed his opinion that I was not showing enough appreciation for the chance that had been given to me. We got into another argument over the phone, and he said that I was still insecure about Alice and her impact on his life. It was far more devastating than anything he had set up to that point, which is why I was making such a big deal out of it. We have been bouncing back and forth on this for the last 2 days. I feel terrible for him because he alternates between being angry with me and pleading with me, and I haven't been able to block him. There isn't much we can do about it, certainly not what she has been saying, but I can see he's really upset about the situation with Alice. It's completely out of the question and absolutely ridiculous. He has been acting irrationally over the entire situation, even discussing it with my parents. They also concur with me that this is a horrible idea and that it's absurd that he's even thinking about it at this time. I don't see any other way out of this. Therefore, I'm genuinely thinking of seeking a divorce at this point. However, he's in a horrible mental condition at the moment, and I don't believe it would be the appropriate thing to leave him, so I feel a little awful about that. I'm really divided, and I'm not sure what I would do if I were to file for divorce, because my husband wanted to donate in order to fulfill his ex's final request, which was to become pregnant. Edit so, while attending college, Kevin and Alice began dating. From the time they first began dating until they filed for divorce, they were together for over 8 years. Even before we began dating, he had admitted to me that he was serious about Alice and that, despite the years that had passed since their last conversation, he couldn't deny that he had felt a strong bond with her. However, after their divorce, things took a turn for the worst. Therefore, the first didn't believe it posed any harm to myself or my relationship with Kevin. In addition, they had not communicated for a while by the time I began seeing him, and he seldom mentioned her unless he was discussing his time in college or anything. I thus had no cause to suspect anything or feel apprehensive about her. I wasn't on high alert when she arrived at our place because of this. However, considering the circumstances, I'm beginning to believe that perhaps he never moved on from her in the first place. It's not that I haven't considered the things you have been saying in the comments, but I don't want to assume the worst about him, at least not at this time, when things are already so confusing. As a result, even while I don't dispute the notion that he still harbors affections for her, seeing her again just served to rekindle those sentiments. Simply put, I don't want to talk about it at this time. One update. Hello. I appreciate all of your support and nice remarks. After posting a few days ago, I've made the decision to have one final conversation with him. This is becoming too much for me, so I'm going to attempt to reason with him. If that doesn't work, I'll have to see a lawyer and obtain a divorce. I'm just giving him this final opportunity because I know he's in mourning. I understand that it must be difficult to realize that someone you have known for 8 years, with whom you once shared a deep connection, will soon no longer even be in your life. It's really challenging, and my sympathies are with him. That's the best I can do for him right now, though. I can only offer my condolences. Alice's final request is dragging him into this absurd predicament, and I refuse to give in to his whims and fancies and let myself get involved. He has completely ceased becoming angry with me in his texts during the last few days. He has just been pleading with me to give this some thought. He's been pleading with me to return so we can speak. I then responded to him this morning, telling him that I was willing to return and speak with him, but that he couldn't lose his cool and start shouting at me the way he had previously, because I would leave right away if he did. At this point, I will not put up with any more disrespect. Because he is unhappy, he cannot just get away with anything. I've also been really disturbed by this circumstance, but I'm not acting in the same manner as him. I made an effort to remain composed and handle the issue with respect, even on the first day when I attempted to dispute with him. However, he was the one who became enraged and began screaming uncontrollably. During the phone chat, he was the one who accused me of being jealous and insecure. Furthermore, I will no longer tolerate this type of conduct. He apologized for his actions after I made it very apparent, and he informed me that although he was not thinking clearly, he would still do all in his power to manage his temper and not let his feelings get the better of him. That's a relief, at least. Additionally, we have agreed to meet at our house tomorrow. Since I used to believe that Kevin was a reasonable and logical man until lately, I honestly don't know what to anticipate at this time. However, I've come to the realization that perhaps I wasn't entirely correct about him after witnessing this side of him. That individuals may behave in unexpected ways while they are grieving. To be honest, I have no idea what tomorrow will bring. Things may or may not turn out as planned. However, I will at least feel satisfied that I did my best to make it work. And at the moment, it's all that counts to me. The second update. Hello, I went over and met Kevin, and I just returned home. He gave me a cordial greeting, expressed regret for his actions, and promised to try to maintain composure this time. And initially, I believed that by at least attempting to give him a chance, I might have done the right thing. After that, we started conversing. I gave him my side of the story. I informed him that if I wanted a child, I was not prepared for this type of circumstance. The infant should be very healthy, please. Additionally, since MD has the potential to be carried through genes, thus I don't believe Alice's pregnancy was a wise choice. Furthermore, it is currently impossible to predict how quickly or slowly the disease would progress given her diagnosis. Additionally, it's probably not appropriate to put her through pregnancy given the situation. We can at least be kind to her by refusing, even if she isn't aware of it herself. Furthermore, even if we agreed to make fun of her, shared custody would be a different topic entirely if she became pregnant, gave birth, and so on. And who knows? It might not be healthy for the kid if they ended up arguing like they did the previous time. Also, since we don't know when Alice will be taken away from everyone due to this illness, it would be particularly cruel for her to give birth, be fully involved in the baby's life, and then leave. And with a baby involved, that's a serious worry. All I could say was that. And none of these things had anything to do with my feelings of insecurity or jealousy toward her, in my perspective. Naturally, I neglected to say that, despite everything else, I found the prospect of the event even coming to pass to be quite unsettling. I didn't believe it would be prudent for me to admit that, though, considering what he had stated previously. I assumed he would understand if I simply attempted to use the pragmatic side of things to reason with him. Instead, he began to raise counter-arguments that were unrelated. He assured me that we would handle these issues when they arose, and that we only needed to accept the current state of affairs. In essence, he wanted me to agree with him, but he wanted to follow the crowd. Furthermore, I'm not the type of person who likes to follow the crowd, particularly when it comes to marriage, pregnancy, and other such situations. I can't take it as lightly as he did, and this is a big matter to me. I explained that to him. Additionally, it was a fundamental gap between us that I never imagined would be put to the test in this way. He had always been more of an impulsive person, but I appreciated that about him and felt that this would make up for it. However, I'm not really certain about that at the moment. Things deteriorated once again when I argued with him, but at least this time he controlled his rage and made an effort to talk sense into my head, despite his obvious distress. He advised me to ignore all of those pragmatic concerns and focus only on the fact that, at the end of the day, we would have a child and I wouldn't even have to endure the pregnancy. It was supposed to be done for us by someone else. The nicest thing was that we would be helping the individual. Even the cost would be lower than that of surrogacy. At that point, I became a little irritated and just told him that I didn't want to be involved in anything as strange and convoluted as this in the first place. Thus, it didn't matter to me that we would eventually have a baby. Nobody else was going to think what Alice was proposing was even possible. It was strange and bizarre, and I didn't like it. I don't know why he was even considering the concept. I could attempt a natural pregnancy if we were serious about having a child. And we still had the choices of adoption, surrogacy, and IVF if that didn't work. I wasn't even thinking about this entire event with Alice, and I could see he was really distraught, which is why he was so determined to follow her final requests. However, it was a bad idea, and he had to acknowledge that she was already acting irrationally. However, as I was neither her friend nor her family, I had no influence over it. As his wife, I would counsel Kevin against it if I had any influence over his life. He only began to seem even more agitated when I attempted to reason with him. After a few minutes of silence, he informed me that we had nothing further to talk about because I had already made up my mind. I had a lot more to say after that, but that was about all. All I wanted to do was shake him and let him know that he was ruining both his own life and our marriage. However, I was so emotionally spent that I simply got up and walked out. After returning home, I sobbed for a bit, told my parents what was going on, and then I started looking for divorce lawyers since I just couldn't handle this anymore. This has been my own. I've done all in my power to be rational and show that what he's doing is insane. But if he doesn't want to see that, then that's his fault. However, I am under no obligation to participate in this madness, and I will not. The third update. Hello. I apologize for being Mia for 2 weeks, but a few days after my last post, I had a lot on my plate. Despite feeling really ill, I managed to get through it and contacted a lawyer. After we prepared the divorce documents, Kevin was served a few days later. Then a few days ago, he made a few little changes in response, but other than that, he wasn't disputing anything. It's now final. We haven't communicated for the last 2 weeks and are getting a divorce. I have been making an effort to be normal. I've been acting as though nothing is wrong when I go to work. My parents are the only people who are aware that we are divorcing, but I'm in a lot of pain inside. It's not as though I don't want to tell my friends about this aspect of my life. To get it off my chest, I want to share my feelings with others. However, this is so bizarre and intimate that I'm not really sure how to approach it. Even just thinking about it makes me feel ashamed. And after reading the comments, I've come to the conclusion that this is an absurd circumstance to be in. Kevin is being absurd, and I'm not sure how to feel about the idea that he's willing to jeopardize our marriage over something like this. Although I haven't spoken to my in-laws, I assume they are aware of this, because a few days ago I saw that they had deleted me from all of their social media profiles. They always seemed to love me, so that was a little startling. Among other things, they would call me the daughter they never had, even though I don't understand how they can bring themselves to agree with whatever their kid is doing. I suppose that given the circumstances, they likely wanted to support him. In any case, it truly is his loss. And despite the fact that I'm still in pain, I'm working to accept it. Within a few days, to inform folks that we are now splitting up, I could post a statement on social media or anything. I may have contacted him before speaking to anybody if we were divorcing under different circumstances, but at the moment, I don't feel the need to do that. I can't wait for this entire situation to end because I'm simply done with him. The fourth update. Approximately a week has passed since my previous post, and today I opened and read a message from an unknown number, discovering it was from Alice. Only a few hours have passed since this incident, and I'm still in disbelief that she actually had the gall to say this to me. Hi there. I'm really sorry that my final wishes caused you and your spouse so much stress. I honestly didn't mean to destroy someone's marriage. I feel terrible about whatever has occurred, and Kevin told me everything. Before I continue, I would want to express my regret for that. I sincerely apologize for anything that has gone wrong. However, given that you couldn't even make such a small sacrifice for your husband's mental health, I also believe that you have no right to accuse me of being unfair. Even though I've accepted that I won't be around for very long, you can see that he's in a lot of distress. Playing along and giving him this instead would have been the least you could have done. He felt terrible about himself because of you. He was only attempting to do something kind for me, but you deceived him into believing that perhaps he was ruining everything in his life. I have no idea why you are so envious and insecure. I've never given you any cause to distrust Kevin, and we've never met before. However, this is the mindset you possessed. It's simply terrible. As a woman, I assumed you would be able to relate to me, but I was obviously mistaken. You are too self-centered to consider anyone but yourself. And for that reason, your marriage is currently in ruins. Kevin deserves better, as much as I hate to admit that. I hope you learn something from this and make an effort to think more broadly. I've said what I had to say anyway. All I can say is that I wish you had opted for kindness. However, that ship has already set sail. Farewell. Enjoy your life. I received this message from her. And midway through the book, I couldn't really understand why she felt she could say this to me and get away with it, and I was on the verge of calling her and shouting her out. I was furious about it for a long time, and I even had a prepared response typed up. However, I changed my mind at the last second, since it's simply not worth it. She had clearly written me this message to get a response from me, but I just refused to give her the gratification she desired. So I took one final look at the message. After cutting her out of my thoughts, I just blocked her. I will not waste my time and effort conversing with such individuals. Simply said, I have no interest. I will finally be done with all of this permanently in a few months, when my divorce from Kevin is completed. I don't need to work harder to convince others of my point of view. It's just not required. The 5th update. Hello, my last update was 5 months ago, and my divorce was finalized a few weeks ago. A handful of my friends contacted me immediately after I announced our split, and I told them everything. So the last 5 months have been an emotional roller coaster. It sounded as absurd as it was. They were totally on my side, and several of our shared acquaintances even chose to cut off communication with Kevin due to his actions. However, that had no impact on him since, as far as I know, he continued to donate. Perhaps they conceived naturally, but whatever the case, I learned 2 months ago that Alice was pregnant. Despite their online insistence that they were not reconciling, I was aware that they had been spending more time together. Perhaps they were only maintaining appearances, since Kevin's connection with her will not look good if he makes it official while he is still divorcing me. I can't deny that I was deeply upset, but at that point, there wasn't much I could do about it. I'm now solely concentrating on myself. I'm attempting to improve my quality of life and divert my attention from anything related to him. I've even instructed everyone, even my pals, to keep his activities a secret from me. Simply said, I'd rather not know. I want to improve myself and go on with my life. That's it. Story 3. After cheating on me during my pregnancy, my husband grabbed our newborn child and went to see his girlfriend without my consent. They're both in legal jeopardy now that I contacted the police. Alan, my ex-husband, and I were wed until 4 months ago. I found him red-handed with his mistress, and we broke up. I had been at my mother's house for about a week at that point, and I was pregnant. I made the decision to return home early in order to surprise Alan. He had been telling me how much he missed me, so I wanted to do something special for him by making him a beautiful breakfast before he left for work. However, he was in bed with another lady when I got home, rather than by himself. Naturally, I yelled and screamed, maybe waking up half the neighborhood. What I was seeing was unbelievable. Alan was in a panic and began saying sorry and attempting to explain himself, but rather than accept responsibility for his actions, he made an effort to make things better by telling me that I should have phoned him before coming home and that I shouldn't have gone home so early. He seemed to be essentially accusing me of catching him in the act. I was so enraged and devastated that I insisted on knowing the woman's identity. Alan, however, continued to sidestep the query. He attempted to deflect by claiming that it didn't important. and that we could discuss it at a later time. However, there was no later at that time. There was no trace of regret on the woman's face, and it was obvious from her look that she had visited my house before. She appeared aloof and unconcerned, as like she didn't give a damn about what was going on. She acknowledged what she had done shamelessly and nodded icily when I inquired whether she and my husband were having an affair. In contrast, Alan shouted at me to ignore her and that he would tell me everything later. After giving him a sneer, the woman started redressing. At that moment, I became aware of something that made my stomach turn. My crimson nightgown was on her. I was surprised. What sort of lady would sleep with her spouse wearing someone else's clothes? I yelled at her to remove my nightgown. My voice trembled with incredulity and rage. After having sex with my spouse, one questioned her about why in the world she believed she was wearing my clothing. My blood boiled at the prospect. She nonchalantly said that she had nothing to wear that evening and that she had chosen what she wanted from my closet. She continued, "It's not like you can fit into these anymore," with a sly grin. I became enraged as she pointed to my growing tummy. What on earth did this lady believe she was? Entering my house, having sex with my spouse, and then daring to put on my clothes without giving it a second thought. I threw myself at her, snatching her hair and pulling it as hard as I could. She thrashed around and yelled in agony, but I was too big and muscular for her to escape. I promised that I would have thrown her to the ground and beaten her severely if I hadn't been pregnant. However, I didn't want to endanger my unborn child. Alan swiftly stepped in and pulled the woman away from me as she kept trying to fight back. The woman came next. She yelled at Alan, her face still full of defiance, that she would kill me for touching her hair, and that if he ever wanted to see her again, he would have to defend her. There was authority in her voice. She addressed Alan as though she were his partner and had complete authority over him. At this point, I began to understand that she wasn't just any woman to him. A one-night stand was not what this was. It was obvious that they knew one another quite well. She was speaking to him as though she were his lover. Unexpectedly, Alan turned against me. He started berating me for hitting her, asking me to stop and behave more sensibly. It seemed unbelievable to me. He was the one who had deceived me, and now he was trying to make me feel bad for defending myself. I asked him to describe her in detail and the nature of their relationship. At this point, Alan started telling me that he had become less and less attracted to me in the months after my pregnancy. As his affections for me waned, he clarified. He got to know Lila, the lady I had seen him with, and discovered that she had the ability to fulfill him in ways that I was never able to. It seemed like the earth had been torn out from beneath me all those months when I heard what he had to say. He no longer cared about the love I believed we had. He continued by saying that his relationship with Lila had evolved from simple hookups to something more significant. Alan gently mentioned that he had been thinking about talking to me about it, but wanted to wait until after I gave birth because I was pregnant. He didn't want to hurt me. As though it were a favor, he said. He had already decided to break up with me. The treachery seemed unbelievable to me. During the 4 years of our marriage, the father of my kid was out having fun with another lady while I was pregnant and carrying his child inside of me. I had been there for Alan through his profession, his aspirations, and his hardships. For what purpose? For him to stab me in the back after turning around. Such like this. My inward anguish and rage were too much to handle. It seemed as though he didn't value any of the sacrifices and affection I had offered. I informed Alan that there was no justification for delaying our divorce until after the baby was born, if he was already so certain that he no longer loved me. What was the purpose of remaining married then? Why prolong it? I was no longer interested in his justifications. Alan attempted to counter that we could discuss it at a later time, but I had had enough. All of his actions caused me too much anguish, and I became furious. I made it clear to him that he had to get his belongings, leave my house, and bring his mistress with. Even though he was no longer attracted to me, I could not stand the insolence of his entering my house and taking that lady into my bed. How could he be so disrespectful to me? Alan was clearly surprised. He didn't anticipate that I would argue back and take such a strong stance, but I wasn't going to back down. I threatened to call the cops on him if he didn't leave. I had no intention of letting him remain in my home any longer. After a while, my ex-husband reluctantly consented and began packing as they were heading out. Lila dared to make fun of me. She made fun of me, claiming that what Alan had told her about me during the previous few months was accurate, that I was a calculating, chilly lady. This is why no man could ever stay with me," she continued ruthlessly. She seemed to be adding salt to a wound that I no longer believed could be harmed, and her comments were extremely painful. To exacerbate the situation, Alan made no attempt to defend myself. I broke at the weight of the treachery as soon as the door closed behind them, and they both departed without saying a word of regret or apology. I was unable to contain my emotions any longer due to the pain and loss. I sobbed like if it were my first time. Even yet, I knew deep down that I couldn't allow them to shatter me. After all, I had learned to be strong from my single mother, who had reared me. Tondo, I will always defend myself. So, even though I was devastated, I got back up. Alan or anybody else could not deprive me of my self-esteem. I contacted a lawyer over the course of the following several weeks, received legal counsel, and filed for divorce. Fortunately, I was wise enough to have Alan sign a prenuptial agreement before to our marriage, which made the divorce process much easier and quicker. I knew this wouldn't be a protracted struggle because I was in a much better financial situation than he was. Our child's custody was the only issue we had to resolve. I was given primary custody of our newborn since I am the mother, at least until our child was older. Alan would have supervised visits as I raised my child. After then, we might be able to alter the custody agreement once more. After everything that had transpired, I couldn't trust him to be alone himself with the infant. Additionally, the attorney made it apparent that, given the circumstances, it was in the child's best interests. We both agreed on this in the end. I eventually gave birth to a gorgeous baby boy 4 days ago. Despite the daunting event, my mother stayed at my side the entire time. I needed all the comfort I could get during the entire childbirth process, so having her there was a relief. The next day, Alan came to see me and our kid while I was still in the hospital getting well. He appeared really proud to be a parent, which surprised me, even though I was furious with him. For the benefit of our child, I wanted us to at least make an effort to be decent co-parents. The only thing that mattered now was our son. My mom made the decision to return home and change after a short period. I could see she needed to sleep because we had been up together for what seemed like hours. I was also emotionally and physically worn out, and I was desperate to sleep. Alan promised to remain in the room and keep an eye on our son while he was being held. Since our son would most likely need to be fed, I instructed him to wake me if he cried. Alan assured me that he would. So you can only imagine how terrified I was when I woke up 3 hours later to my mother asking me in a panic, "Where's your baby?" As I struggled to collect my thoughts, I felt lost and bewildered. We searched the hospital room, but Alan and my baby were not there. As soon as I recognized that something was seriously wrong, my heart began to race and my adrenaline began to surge. I asked the nurses right away if they had seen my kid or Alan. At last, one of them informed me. She had witnessed Alan leaving the hospital with my child, which horrified me. I was stunned with shock as those words hit me. Alan had agreed to stay and look after my child. Thus, he had no right to depart with him without my consent. I was having a hard time processing what was occurring, since my mind was spinning. I reached for my phone and began hurriedly phoning him, but he didn't answer. My anxiousness only increased with each call that went unanswered. I was about to have a panic attack because my heart was racing in my chest. Alan took him where? What if my son was hungry when he woke up? What was he going to eat? Did Alan intend to go missing with him? To separate me from my child? My head was filled with all sorts of unsettling questions. Every one is scarier than the previous. I was just concerned about my baby and his well-being. Alan finally answered the phone after nearly several missed calls. Or so I believed. To my surprise, though, the voice on the other end wasn't Alan's. Lila was the one. Since I had not let her to see me in the hospital, she calmly told me that my baby was with her and that Alan had brought him back to their home to show her our son. It was accurate. Since I didn't want to see Lila, I had told Alan no when he asked if he could bring her along. I asked her how my son was doing and if she could give Alan the phone so I could vent to him for taking my child without permission. Then Lila informed me that my kid had woken up, wailing and obviously hungry, not long after Alan had brought him there. In order to feed him, Alan had rushed to a grocery shop to get some formula. She went on to say that I had to wait if I wanted to speak with Alan, since he had inadvertently left his phone behind. I was completely surprised. She asked me to wait since my son had woken up screaming and hungry. Furthermore, because I, as his mother, had not consented to their giving my kid formula, What authority did they have? I insisted right away that she take my son back to the hospital and bring him back to me so I could feed him. However, Lila contended that she and Alan were well adjusted, asserting that they would soon be my son's parents alongside me and that they also understood what was best for him. She assured me that Alan would bring the kid back to me once they fed him, so I should stop worrying. She sounded like a crazed maniac attempting to defend keeping my hungry baby away from me because of how cold and contemptuous her tone was. She said that she and Alan had studied parenting manuals, so they were ready to raise my kid without me, despite my repeated requests for her to bring my baby back. Her remarks simply made me more enraged at the time. I knew I had to move quickly and decisively. I hung up on Lila and called the cops right away. I informed them that my newborn boy had been abducted by my ex-husband and taken to a stranger, as I described how afraid I was for my baby's safety, especially because I had just given birth a day earlier. My heart was pounding. I was obsessed by the worry that something would happen to him, that he might be afraid or injured without me. I had to make sure he was securely brought back to me. The cops arrived in less than an hour. For abducting and putting my child in risk, Alan and Lila were taken into custody. They returned my son to the hospital shortly after that. He appeared to be in good physical condition, but I could tell he had been sobbing for hours as I hurried to feed and change him. It crushed my heart to see his small face flushed. I was relieved that my kid was back with me, where he belonged. Even if the entire situation was a nightmare, Lila and my ex have been out on bond ever since, but they are being charged and will soon have to appear in court. I stated unequivocally that I wanted them to be held accountable for their actions and that I was not dropping the accusations. There was no way I could ignore this. They had to accept responsibility for their actions, and my baby's safety was in jeopardy. Alan first said that I was exaggerating, that he had done nothing illegal, and that I shouldn't have reported them to the police. He made an effort to excuse himself by saying that he was merely attempting to brag about our son, but it was clear that he was unaware of the gravity of the issue. He believed he could simply leave without any repercussions, but I suppose Alan has changed his mind after speaking with a lawyer. He is now pleading with me to forgive him, saying that he faces jail time and asking me to reevaluate the accusations. Aita, Reddit. Everyone who has been wondering why Alan and Lila would do this has an update. Like all of you, I am in a state of shock. I believed that, for the benefit of our son, we could at least co-parent with help after our divorce. However, Alan's actions go much beyond any boundaries. It cannot be forgiven. He was not entitled to simply grab my baby and go, particularly because he was not even granted primary custody. He would remove my kid without telling me or thinking about the impact on me or the child, which betrays a total lack of regard for me as his mother. It's also about fundamental decency and parental responsibilities, not simply custody. I have to be consulted before he can make judgments like these, particularly when our one-day-old kid is involved. It seems to me that some of you don't really get what it's like to be a parent, especially a mother, based on the comments I've read wondering why I contacted the police. It is impossible to just take a newborn away from its mother, as any parent who has a kid knows. Newborns require ongoing attention. They must be held, fed, and changed. It goes beyond a few hours. They require care around the clock. My son was weeping when he came back to me. He was hungry, and his diaper had not been changed. Seeing him like that crushed my heart. Alan and Lila in particular have no right to place my child in that predicament. I had to take all required precautions as a mother to ensure my child's safety. The only way to guarantee that he was given back to me right away was to call the police. How could Lila and my ex decide to buy and give my baby formula on their own without consulting me? They didn't make that choice, particularly when I'm the mom. It's really ridiculous. Above all, how could my ex abandon my child for someone I don't even know well? I only know him because I discovered her having an affair with him. What would have happened to my child if he had been with her? What if she had hurt him in any way? How could he have acted so carelessly? So irresponsible. I'm terrified by the very concept. I'm glad I called the police. Not for a moment. They did something wrong, and I will not overlook it. That my baby is back with me and doing well makes me very happy. However, I will ensure that Alan and Lila are held responsible for their actions. My son is my first concern, and I will stop at nothing to ensure his eternal safety, even if it means making difficult choices. Update as well. My last update was 1 week ago. I'm glad to report that both my infant and I are doing well at this point. My mother is staying with us to assist now that we're back home. In case something goes wrong, I've also taken sure to install cameras everywhere. After all that's transpired, I'm not taking any chances with my son's safety. In an attempt to have the charges dropped, my ex has been pleading with me for forgiveness. Although I have been ignoring him, it seems like he is afraid of going to jail. When he unexpectedly came up at my house the other day, appearing agitated and frantic, he attempted to approach me and start a heated argument. I refused to allow him in. I shut the door behind me and went out onto the porch instead. I wasn't going to let this stranger to wake up my kid, who was napping inside. In essence, Alan asked me how my child's father was doing. He had every right to take our son anywhere he pleased, and he wanted me to relax and quit behaving like the nasty ex-wife. He asked me to attempt to explain to the police that it was all a great misunderstanding and to dismiss the charges right now. It was quite astounding how bold he was. Even though that wasn't true, I told him that I wouldn't do something like that. Then, completely ignoring all we had experienced and everything I had gone through, he informed me that this seemed to be the reason he had initially lost interest in me. He spoke in a condescending manner while staring me in the eye. "Way you have behaved throughout this entire process. That's precisely the reason I was unable to continue being with you. You're extremely strict and domineering. I cheated for this reason. It's so hard to cope with you. It makes sense why our relationship ended badly. Everything you touch becomes suffocated by you." Before I could respond, his word choice surprised me. He was still shouting at me. "Is it true that you are the sole parent present? This is also my son, and you should respect me. You had no authority to contact the police and have me taken into custody." It felt to him like I was to blame for everything. He had been pressured to cheat by me. It was me who had caused him to lose his affection. It was me that had made him feel confined. He appeared utterly unaware of the seriousness of his actions, and to believe that, simply because he was the father, he could act any way he pleased without facing any repercussions. I inhaled, remained steadfast, and warned him that his manipulation would no longer be effective as I met his eyes. I wasn't the same gullible lady he used to be able to walk all over. "You don't have the right to stand here and explain to me why you no longer love me. You are unfaithful. You told a falsehood. Furthermore, you are the one who ruined everything. I'm happy our divorce was finalized, and you are no longer important to me. It's not about us, though. It has to do with my son. Just 1 day after his birth, you went him to see your girlfriend. When I was in the hospital getting well, I know you didn't have the right to do that, and so do I. Do you now believe that I should simply let go? I will not dismiss the charges, so it doesn't matter whether you're afraid of going to jail." I interrupted him as his jaw tightened, and I could tell he was struggling to think of anything to say. "Alan, you are no longer allowed to play the victim. You are now dealing with the repercussions of the decisions you made. You believe that because you and my kid have the same DNA, you should be given leniency? Remind yourself that fatherhood is about deeds, not biology. Furthermore, your behavior has just served to highlight how unqualified and immature you are to make decisions for him. I'll see to it that the court holds you accountable for this." Then, while he kept shouting with his other hand, I closed the door on his face. He went too far, and I won't back down. Since that day, Layla has kept sending me the most disgusting, insane texts. She seems to have made it her particular goal to constantly bug me. She surprises me every time I think she can't be any worse. That woman's arrogance is unbounded. She wrote to me to tell me that she was excited to become the mother of my boy and that I lost her opportunity because I had her detained out of envy. She went on to say that my kid and I didn't deserve to live and that she hoped we would perish in an automobile accident. When I read the message, I was astounded. It was just repulsive. Who would want to kill someone, particularly a mother and her child? She is very rude and disgusting. My lawyer has seen all of Lila's disgusting communications, and we are acting right now. As soon as feasible, we want to obtain a restraining order against Lila. Considering the fact that her teachings have been so malevolent and dangerous, we think it's important to make sure she never sees me or my child again. Update 3. I haven't posted anything in a month and a half. Yesterday was finally the day of the court hearing. Lila and Alan were accompanied by their attorneys, naturally attempting to minimize the incident and abdicate any accountability. Alan made a lot of justifications in his defense. He attempted to explain that he was bringing the baby to Lila since I was asleep in an attempt to be a good parent, and that he would give the baby back to me later that day. He claimed that I was mostly to blame for denying him permission to visit our kid with Lila. He claimed that I panicked out because of my hormones and phoned the police without cause, although it seems that he never intended to hurt anyone. But the situation's truth spoke for itself. Regardless of what he said, he had essentially disregarded my rights as a mother, stolen my child without my consent, and placed him in the care of a lady I hardly knew. His actions had no justification. He pleaded with the court to be more forgiving. Naturally, Lila also refused to accept any accountability. She attempted to pretend that she was now some sort of stepmother, and that she had every right to be engaged with my son. She said that I was attempting to make her life too difficult, and that I held a grudge against her since she had won my husband for me. At this moment, my attorney stepped in the courtroom and started reading aloud all of Lila's nasty, threatening, and hateful texts. The judge needed to know the true nature of my ex's girlfriend and why she needed to keep a safe distance from me and the child. I could see the look of shock on everyone's faces. Lila obviously didn't respect my son, myself, or our limits. The court made a clear decision after considering all the evidence, including the texts, the chronology of events, the police reports, and my testimony. Alan was convicted of kidnapping and putting a child's welfare in jeopardy. Lila, age 2, was accused of putting the youngster in risk. Alan was ultimately sentenced to a year of probation and required parenting lessons. He will go to jail if he violates the conditions of his probation. A restraining order was issued to Lila, telling her to avoid me and my family. I would no longer have to be concerned about Lila sending me cruel texts because of the restraining order, and that was confirmed by the court's ruling. As a mother, I had the last word in my child's upbringing. In addition, they both had to compensate me and the infant for the emotional pain they had caused. By the end of the court case, I could see Lila and Alan fuming with anger, but they were powerless to stop it. They received their just desserts. It had been 6 months since the court hearing, and things have gradually started to seem more normal again. Every time my baby, who is almost 6 months old, and I still find it hard to believe it, smiles for the first time, it fills me with happiness. It was all worthwhile when he turned over for the first time and is now nearly sitting up by himself. I've been concentrating on ensuring that he is raised in a secure, caring home with friends and relatives who genuinely care about him. I'm really appreciative of my mom's support, and she comes to see us whenever she can. From looking after my baby at night to providing emotional support when I needed it most, she has been a big help. Without her, I genuinely don't know how I would have managed. Lila and Alan, on the other hand, have been totally absent. Alan made a few more attempts to contact me, but I didn't answer. I've had enough of him. I have stated unequivocally that my kid and I will proceed without him, and we are doing just that. I haven't spoken to Lila directly since the court hearing, but the restraining orders have been effective. To be honest, there are still times when I remember everything that transpired between Alan and Lila, and the hurt and rage return. However, I make an effort not to allow those feelings control me. Right now, my son and the life we're creating together are what count.